completely undermines his authority. And he looks very weak in that he wasn't able to stop it. And that a lot of the people who he'd probably count on to come out and say, we're supporting Putin at this moment, stayed silent, including some of his top propagandists. Astonishing weekend event, Matt. We had on Friday night, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the boss of the Wagner Russian mercenary group, released a video in which he said it was the aftermath of a Russian rocket strike on his base in Ukraine. He said scores of Wagner fighters had been killed. And he was announcing a march on Moscow for justice, and he wanted the removal of the defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. And very quickly, it transpired that Wagner mercenaries in armored vehicles and tanks were already en route to Rostov-on-Don, which is one of the major military hubs for Russia in conducting the war in Ukraine. They very quickly seized the town. We had incredible footage of mercenary soldiers fanning out through the center of a Russian city, hiding behind buildings, moving on the southern military district command headquarters, and taking it captured without a fight. There was no resistance in that. And then they also had another column that was moving up the road to Moscow, took the city of Voronezh again without much of a fight. Putin ordered some helicopters to attack the Wagner column as it proceeded towards Moscow, but they shot down at least 2 helicopters, probably more. And then when they were only about 120 miles away from Moscow, and Moscow is evacuating its public buildings, people are starting to panic. There are government flights which are linked to Putin leaving Moscow, lots of private jets leaving the city. It all looks like suddenly there's going to be a battle on the streets of Moscow out of nothing. And then Prigozhin just calls it off and says, actually, we've made a deal with Lukashenko, Belarus's president, and I'm going to go and live safely in Belarus, which has left a lot of the Wagner mercenaries who took part in this mutiny rather disappointed and uncertain of their future.
So where are we today? Putin's position is clearly more vulnerable than it was before the weekend.
Absolutely. It's difficult to see how Putin can continue with this idea. He's been all powerful for nearly 2 decades now. And his entire power system and power structure is based on the idea that he can't be challenged, and that any challenge to his authority is met with brute force and put down immediately. And here you have a mutiny from close within the Kremlin ranks that marches on Moscow, kills Russian soldiers, that shoots down Russian aircraft, and is now going to go unpunished, and there will be an amnesty for them. It just completely undermines his authority, and he looks very weak in that he wasn't able to stop it, and that a lot of the people who he'd probably count on to come out and say, we're supporting Putin at this moment, stayed silent, including some of his top propagandists.
And in terms of the direction of the war, I mean, all the focus, having previously been on what was happening within Ukraine, has instead been on Russia. How is this affecting, or do you think this will affect the conflict within Ukraine?
Well, it looked very exciting on Saturday, where Wagner had occupied Rostov-on-Don, because this is such a major military logistics hub, and really Russia would struggle to prosecute its war in Ukraine without access to that. So even if Prigozhin had just sat there for a week, it would have severely disrupted Russian supply lines and caused Russian soldiers to worry about what's happening in their rear. There is still going to be obviously concern amongst the Russian soldiers that things back home in Russia are not safe and secure, and that again eats away at Russian morale, which is already probably pretty low. And it also takes Wagner, which is a really quite capable fighting force, responsible for the only kind of relative victory that Russia have had in past months in taking the town of Bakhmut. It takes them off the battlefield. They aren't going to be fighting, certainly as a unit, in Ukraine anytime soon, I imagine. I think Prigozhin will try and hold on to as many of them wherever he goes as possible, because he needs this security against Putin decided he does actually need to make an example, and he does actually need to punish him and comes after him wherever he goes.